In 1970, Jean Rollin would release his second feature-length film titled The Nude Vampire, La Vampire Nue. I watched it, and it. I have a hard time talking about the Nude Vampire because I've seen it twice in full, and I've rewatched a few scenes since the first time that I watched it, and I get really super emotional. I got extremely emotional both times that I watched it in full. I For the last half hour of the movie, 20 minutes, 30 minutes of the movie, like there's a point where something happens that makes me start sobbing, and by the end of the movie I feel cleansed, I feel released, I feel like my life has been made anew. This is Vanessa Jupiter sitting room. Welcome to the anti-capitalist paradise of the nude vampire. So I do want to start with some like basic technical stuff about the movie. First of all, the cinematography is gorgeous. I want to do an experiment right now where I generate random numbers and I go to the timestamp of that number and watch the shot that the movie has in that timestamp. For real, I don't know if this is going to be successful here, but for real, I have a hard time imagining that I'm going to fall into more than one even remotely bad looking shot. I think that all three are going to be good. And I would not be surprised if all three were just astounding. There are some wide shots here that are out of this world. There are some close-ups that are out of this world. Early on in the movie, the main character is seen in this close-up that makes his face look so uncanny, and to this moment, I don't know what they did to his face for his face to look so weird. But there's this close-up very early in the movie on him that just gives humans a weird quality. And with the wide shots, with the cinematography that is like with the editing that is not especially fast paced, I do feel the need to address the fact that the movie isn't fast. It is not an like from beginning to end enjoyable experience, I'd say. Especially the beginning, especially the first time that I watched it, it was a good half hour of me just sitting back and being like, okay, this is vibes. This is not plot, this is just vibes. And for the entire duration of my first viewing, I could not distinguish between the characters well enough because they were not well established enough, and I could not follow the plot quite as well as I could the second time. The second time I noticed that the plot existed from the beginning. I see a lot of people online claiming that this movie is very surrealistic and stuff. It really isn't that much. Like the plot is quite straightforward. Is just told in a way that is kind of slow and vibes based, which I'm not going to try to argue that it's good. It's one of the reasons why this movie ends up like ranking so high among movies is because of the emotional journey that it sends me on. I never think that it's boring. If I thought that it was boring, I would not rank it as high as I do. I think that I had to accept the not so great parts to get to the emotional fulfillment of the end, which I think is worth it. I think it's more than worth it. All that to say, is this a perfect movie? Probably not. There are scenes where people are shot and it's literally not possible to understand if they're being shot or not because the special effects are so bad. And this is 1970. This is not that long ago. Besides the cinematography, I think that the movie becomes a visual feast because of the costume design and the set design. And the masks, obviously, the masks are amazing and they feature prominently in the first 15 minutes of the movie. Since I'm being a little bit more critical on the movie right now, I'm also going to address the fact that at the end of the movie, one of the good characters actually uses a lot of this language of new people who evolve to be better, blah blah blah. This type of language always rings eugenics alarm bells in my brain, and I never like it. I never like the idea of a superior race. It doesn't seem quite thoughtful. I find it very easy to overlook, precisely because one, they're coded as poor and queer, but also two, um, because it's just like 2 or 3 lines at most in the entire movie, so whatever. Like, easy to overlook. But the movie did ring my eugenics alarm bells, which is never a good thing. We never want my eugenics alarm bells to be ringing. They ring all the time. It's unfortunate to live in the world. Now, for my 3 little scores before I move into the deeper analysis. General score, this is obviously a 10 out of 10 for me. Like, this is unquestioned 10 out of 10. It was one of these movies that as soon as I saw it the first time, I was like, yeah, this is one of the best things I've ever seen. I would feel bad giving it a lower score than 10. And then the second thing that I'm ranking in these vampire movies is how good are the vampires? How good are the vampires as vampires? And etc. I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. I love them. I really do. Uh, they're not quite enough vampire scenes for me. There's one standout vampire scene, and the mythology of the vampires is perfect, except for the eugenics part. I think of the vampires as a metaphor for oppressed groups and marginalized groups. I don't think I've ever seen it done as well as this. They get an 8 instead of a 10 because I could have used a little bit more blood, I could have used a little bit more, like, when I go into a vampire movie, I'm expecting some things from the vampires, and this movie didn't necessarily give them to me that well. Then finally, the final score that I'm giving for these vampire movies is sexiness. I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10. It's not unsexy by any means. There are a couple of dance scenes that are... We'll talk about them. We'll talk about the dance scenes. There's one amazing scene. The same scene that is very vampiric is also quite sexy. It is the sexiest moment of the movie. We're going to also talk about this in a little bit more detail in a second. It's not meant to be quite as sexy. It's the costumes are more fun than they are sexy. The dance scenes are more weird than they are sexy. I think it makes perfect sense for the movie that it isn't as sexy. But the fact that it isn't quite as sexy does mean that it loses points in the sexiness level. So it's a 6 out of 10. Let's start with the dance scenes, actually. The film has 2 main factions, right? It has the capitalists, which are these old men who own this castle, and they're awful, and they have a son, and they have the suicide cult to feed a vampire. And then there's the other faction, which is the vampires, and we'll get to them later. But there's this dance scene that is performed to the aristocrats, and their reaction to it's like they are so unhorny as they're watching it, and it is very clearly meant to be like a sexy dance scene, and it is an incredible dance scene to watch as the viewer of the movie. But then we see the men who are actually being performed to, and they are so unbothered. And this is something that I find fascinating because we never really see them horny or excited. We only ever see them watching sexy dancers in a cold, distant way. The one time that one of the richer people is actually going to engage in some type of sexual act, it is interrupted, and he never fulfills that. And we also see the main big bad, the father of the movie, the the big capitalist who organizes the suicide cult. There is one scene where we see him abusing one of his domestic workers, and he's also very unbothered in that scene. He's speaking on the phone while he's just casually grabbing her tie. And in that scene in particular, I think it's a complicated scene to talk about because the actress who's playing the character who's being groped, she plays it in a way that could almost be perceived as her liking it, but that is very much complicated by the fact that that character is ultimately going to side with the vampires. She's going to choose to be part of the vampire cult at the end. So we very much have this arc of the domestic women who are forced to perform sexual favors for their um, employer, leaving and joining the group that is ultimately going to take him down. And this is why the message of this movie to me is so clear and powerful. It's where all of this comes together, where the we see the exploited people, including the two dancers who, by the way, happen to be non-white. The like all of the people who are rich and powerful are white, and some and there are some non-white characters, and all of them are in positions of submission, of exploitation. I find this fascinating because it is so on the nose to me. Nobody who joins the vampire cult seems to ever be forced by it. I know that I've been using the word cult and I've been talking about the cult leader. Like, it's a community. It is a community, and there's someone who is there organizing the community. Like, those would be more apt words, but it is cult imagery at the same time. Like, I like the cult imagery, I'm not gonna lie. I like the cult leader vibes. I like all of that. But, like, yeah, I don't know what to say. Like, for me it works on an emotional level, but I get why that could be a turn off for people. But at the end of the day, one of the things that really works and makes it seem like a good cult and like a community instead of a cult is because nobody is ever forced to join. The group of evil capitalists kidnap a vampire, and all the other vampires come together as a community to take her back, and they successfully do it. And when we finally see them as a group, they're coded as poor. Like, they are not wearing like fancy clothes. They're not wearing the suits. They're not wearing the big fancy dresses that we saw everyone else up to that point wearing. It is a movie about a class uprising. And I think that the sexual politics of the movie are intrinsically connected to the class politics of the movie, where we see tenderness scenes. The one scene that I mentioned a couple of times, the scene that I think elevates the vampire and the sexiness of the movie, it is between two people in the vampire faction. One of them again, a woman a non-white woman who cuts herself right here and gives her own blood to a vampire. That is the sexiest moment of the movie. That is the most tender moment of the movie, and it happens between the people who actually have community, because for them sex isn't a transaction. For them sex isn't motivated by money. For them sex is a hot thing. It is not this cold, transactional, meaningless thing that it is for the big bad capitalists. And speaking of the sexual politics of the movie, also the rich aristocrats, we see them a lot more obsessed with sex than we ever see the vampire queer weirdos be. The queer weirdos, they will have sex, yes, and the sex is going to be hotter, yes, and they're going to do it in a way that feels more tender and more passionate, yes, but they also don't care that much. It's kind of like the nudity in the movie. Whenever the women are performing for the aristocrats, for the capitalists, um, the nudity is this fake thing. It, like the second dance scene in particular, has multiple moments where we see it's such a strange scene. It is such a strange scene. There are so many moments where we see the woman just grabbing her breast and being like completely unbothered, and it very much feels like these men are obsessed with sex and sexuality without ever allowing themselves to be horny. Whereas the vampires, yeah, they'll be naked, yeah, they'll be tits, and yeah, they'll be horny about it, uh, and they'll be a lot more honest about it. It's like, listen, like I'm getting emotional again because watching the movie, I like part of me almost couldn't believe like. Like what the movie is doing is that it is presenting two very clear factions. It's presenting a world where there is a clear class division, and within that class division there is also a queer division. Like there are the queer weirdo poor people, and they're the straight sex obsessed and sexually like stilted capitalists, and the movie lets the poor queer vampires win. They win. They come, and they not only do they win, it is indisputable that they are good. Like they never kill anyone. They make a point of never killing anyone. There is this final scene where the protagonist of the movie, who is the son of one of the capitalists, goes back to his house after having already been accepted into the vampire group, after already being invited to the vampire group, after already being seen as being part of the vampire group, which feels such an obvious queer allegory to me, where some people are queer, and like as long as you are also opposing power, you are welcome to join us. Like it's like it's not enough to just be queer, but it is perceivable that someone is queer, and then they are willing to challenge power and challenge the power structures and go against his own father, then he's welcome to join. And so after that, he goes back to the house of his father, and he sees the three old men, the three capitalists, and they're pathetic. They're pathetic. And this is all the revenge that we needed to get. We didn't need the vampires to kill them. We didn't need the vampires to overthrow them completely. We just needed to see them as these. We just needed to see them depowered. I love revenge fantasies. I would have loved to see those rich capitalists burn. But in terms of a movie sending a message, the fact that it goes completely out of its way to have the capitalists be unambiguously bad, the ones who created a suicide cult, and have the vampires be unambiguously good, the ones who were just there to retrieve the captive member of their community who was kidnapped by the capitalists without throwing in even a single punch at the capitalists. At the end of the day, I think that the message that this sends is like so clear. It positions itself so clearly against capitalism, and for them to have the beach where they live in harmony and in peace, and they create their own queer paradise. It is extremely cathartic. I love it. I got emotional here. Okay, so hi. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Vanessa Jupiter Sitting Room. Uh, I am going through the Jean Rollin films. This is the second Jean Rollin feature film, and it is also the second one that I'm talking about. And I'm not going to make the promise of actually going through all of them on the channel, especially like I can't churn out videos fast if it's about a movie that is this intense. Like for the first movie, The Rape of the Vampire / The Vampire Woman, it was easy. I could watch the movie, sit in front of the camera, and talk about what I liked and what I didn't like. Easy. For this, I just. And if Jean Rollin does this to me again, I'm sorry, but it'll take a while. And also, I might get distracted. I might want to do other things on the channel. In any case, this is a channel where I do give myself the leeway to do basically whatever I want. And what I've been wanting to do is talk about vampire stuff, so this is what I've been doing. And if I change my mind at some point, then I'll change my mind. It's fine. I don't know what else to say. Thank you so much for watching. Follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram, and I will see you next time, whenever that is. Uh, Love, Vanessa Jupiter.